What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're doing the buy low targets. In fact, the top 5 buy low targets of week 10. We're getting close to the playoffs, trade deadlines approaching, so it's very important that you send out as many offers as you can, and it's very important that you make sure you target the right guys. So here's the list of the top 5 guys that we have for you this week. But before we do jump into the video though, make sure you're following both Nick and I on Twitter. If you guys have questions, that's the best place to get in contact with us. We are getting a ton of questions and we try to answer as many as we can. But if you guys want some one-on-one time with us, that is going to be your best resource. So follow us on Twitter. Scored a whopping 6.3 fantasy points, and that's in PPR leagues, okay? That is super easy to do. You can get that type of production on the waiver wire, so needless to say, it was a terrible week for him, and a lot of people aren't interested in owning a player like Peterson because, like I said, the boom bust factor is there, and while that is true, he has been extremely predictable when to start and sit him, so that's a benefit. Most people who don't pay attention and think that he is boom or bust and that he's impossible to predict, they just aren't looking at the situation the right way. The formula for Peterson is very simple. If the opposing team has a weak offense and Washington can hold a lead or avoid playing from a big deficit, Peterson's going to feast. In games where they trail and trail early, he isn't going to be involved. Remember, he's not heavily used in the passing game. Chris Thompson is looking like he's going to be on the field now. And if you look back at the 3 games where he really busted, they were against Atlanta, New Orleans, and the Colts. Atlanta and New Orleans we could see coming from a mile away, but the Colts was a bit unpredictable because they aren't a great offense, but that game did get out of hand early. Remember, the final score of that game was 21-9. But for the remainder of the season, he has several matchups that he can definitely exploit, including a playoff schedule in which he faces the Giants, the Jaguars, and the Titans. He's already carved up the Giants for over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns just a couple weeks ago, so you know he's going to perform well there. And if we're looking at his individual performance and how he's been on the season, he screams RB1 in several major categories. So get this, he's 8th in snaps, 5th in attempts, so the volume's there. As for efficiency, he's 5th in yards after contact, 5th in elusiveness rating, and 9th in breakaway percentage. So he's done all that while also committing no penalties. What more could you ask from the guy? Yeah, he's old, but he's getting it done. One thing I do have to mention though is that the offensive line suffered a couple massive injuries, so that's going to be a main detractor. And while this is going to likely impact his production, it's also going to make it easier for you to target him and get him off of panicked fantasy owners who think that they're selling high on him. Use that as a bargaining tool though. Don't pay full price for him. Tell him, hey, what do you expect for him? He's got a banged up offensive line. He's coming off a game where he scored 6.3 fantasy points. If they're asking for too much, don't trade for him. But I think you can get him super cheap right now. Definitely the cheapest you can get him all season. And me personally, I would definitely be willing to trade someone like Kenyon Drake for him, who is basically the polar opposite of Peterson when it comes to how easy it is to predict the good games versus the bad games. So that's just an example of a player who I would give up in order to get him. Moving on to the first wide receiver, we have none other than Kenny Golladay. And I know a lot of owners super disappointed with the lack of production from him in his first game without Tate, but fear not, he's going to get more targets. That's a fact. And for those of you who don't currently own Golladay, you have to see this bad game as a positive thing because that just means you're going to get him cheaper. Remember, this was a game where Stafford overall didn't really look like himself. He did throw for a decent amount of passes at 36, but 14 of them went to the running back position, which is basically 40% of his total attempts. And considering heading into this game, he averaged about 20% of his targets to the running back position, I don't think this is a trend that you should expect to continue. Now, obviously, a lot of it had to do with losing Tate. They do need a guy to dump the ball off to, which normally Tate filled that role, which means I do believe that 20% number will come up, but come on, 40%, that's ridiculous. That's game flow dependent, and there's going to be way more opportunities for Golladay in the future because think of the outcome. They threw to the running back position a lot, and where did it get him? It got him absolutely nowhere. That offense looked terrible. They're going to have to reassess, and they're going to see that they didn't give Golladay enough targets, so expect him to bounce back and be a key contributor moving forward. One thing worth noting though is that he is coming up against a tough divisional matchup against the Chicago Bears, who have actually been more hit or miss against opposing fantasy receivers than you might think. I know we think the Bears and we think an insane defense, but the teams usually either perform extremely bad against them or extremely good against them. Guessing which performance we're going to see on Sunday is going to be really difficult because it's divisional. Things happen weird. So if you want to wait a week and hope that he has another bad performance against Chicago, I can understand it. Me personally, I might not do it. If he has a bad game, you're going to get him a lot cheaper, but if he has a good game, maybe 9 targets, 7 receptions, 100 yards, and a touchdown, you are not going to have a chance at getting him. So the big question is going to be, where do I value him? And it's probably not as high as you guys think it is. I value him as a back-end wide receiver too, someone who I believe is going to be a little bit more consistent than some of the other back-end wide receiver twos. And the reason I don't rank him higher is because the defensive schedule is really tough towards the second half of the season. I'm extremely low on Matthew Stafford rest of season, but if you can get him somewhere in the neighborhood of back-end wide receiver 2 value, I think you are getting a great deal. The next player is Sony Michel, who is likely returning this week, which means he needs to be on all trade radars. Remember, he was a back-end RB1 prior to his injury, and ever since Burkhead went out on IR, and I suspect as soon as he gets back, that's exactly where he's going to return to. Nobody on this offense at the running back position really stepped up while he was out. I mean, there was Cordero Patterson, who got more touches than expected, but you better believe when Michel returns, he's going to be the guy. James White, he's not going anywhere, and that's going to limit his overall ceiling, but Michel was playing really well with James White there. I think they can be a 1-2 combination there, where James White is the primary pass catching back. Michel wasn't really catching passes anyway. He made more of his heyday with the touchdowns. In fact, the 3 healthy games with Burkhead out, Michel was hyper consistent, going over 100 yards in each game and even scoring 4 touchdowns. So if you don't want that on your team, you're absolutely crazy, but keep in mind, those were against really poor run defenses, including Miami, who we know has been torched by running backs all season long. But the good news is though, Patriots offense is definitely trending upward. Josh Gordon's coming into his own, which means they're going to have plenty of scoring opportunities moving forward. But even considering that, remember, he's an injury prone guy, so you can't pay equal RB1 value for him because you're not going to be making a profit in this deal. When we're making trades, we want to make a profit. And if you're paying RB1 value, you're taking on too much risk for the reward that you're getting by getting him on your team. But I believe if you are able to put a package deal together with someone like Jordan Howard plus another player, because remember, Jordan Howard, he's coming off of a couple good games now, I think you're easily gaining a player who's going to have both a higher floor and a higher ceiling overall. The next player is Tyreek Hill, and we have the Kansas City offense that everyone should want a piece of. And Tyreek Hill, he's one of the few wide receivers that have that game-breaking upside. What type of game-breaking upside? Well, how many receivers have had 2 games over 39 points? Not many. Those are the type of players that can win you a week almost on their own, and if you can land one of those performances in the playoffs, you're going to be set. And the good news is, in week 15, which is the week who determines who makes it to the actual championship, where most people get paid for second place no matter what, even if they lose the championship, he faces the Chargers, who he absolutely torched for 42.3 points in week 1. And the way that you can buy low on him if you're making a deal with somebody is to mention how many targets he's had in the past 2 weeks. They're extremely low. After receiving 12 and 10 back-to-back weeks and turning them into over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns, he now has a total of 9 targets in the past 2 weeks. 1 game with 4 and 1 game with 5. That shouldn't scare you away though. He's still playing a ton of snaps, but let that be the reason that you can get him off your league mate a little bit cheaper than his actual value is. When they ask for full value, just mention the fact that he just had a groin injury last week, which always has a higher risk of re-aggravating it, and then mention that he hasn't had more than 5 targets since week 7. They're going to look into it, they're going to get scared, and that may be enough for them to pull the trigger. Just spin it in a way where you're helping them negate some risk, maybe taking a player of lesser value or lesser upside, but by doing that, they're going to add more safety to their team. You'd be surprised at how many questions I've received about people asking if they should trade away Hill because they're getting worried. And I don't blame them. The last 2 weeks were his second and third worst performances of the season, so I can understand why. But I'm telling you guys, don't be worried about it. His bad games, he's still scored over double-digit points, which is more than you could say for a lot of receivers in the league. So target Tyreek Hill, target him with confidence. You're going to be happy. The final player on this list is super simple, and it's probably going to come as a surprise. It's Jeffery of the Philadelphia Eagles. And the reason being is that Jeffery is just a complete monster in the red zone, and nothing is changing towards the end of the season. He's only played in just 5 games this season, and he already has more red zone targets than Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs, and Emmanuel Sanders, who have been super consistent all season long. And if he were to have played the full season up to this point, he would currently be ranked 4th in the league in red zone targets behind only Alvin Kamara, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Devontae Adams. So if you ask me, that's the type of upside you can't pass up for your fantasy team. Not only that, he's already had a 100-yard game and a multi-TD game, and he's done that through 5 appearances. So if you're looking for upside, this guy guy's got the whole package. And the best part is, the fantasy owners, they're probably forgetting about him a little bit because he's coming off the bye, and before that, he had a poor performance against Jacksonville, and now he's coming into a matchup against Dallas, which is pretty poor on paper. It's a divisional game, first of all, and secondly, Dallas has a way of just limiting opposing offenses. Their defense is super underrated, but if you're wondering if you should own Jeffery or target him, there's no need to overthink it. He can safely be locked into the wide receiver 2 slot for the rest of the season with wide receiver 1 upside any given week. But similarly to Golladay, this is another situation where you could wait and hope for another bad game and get him a little bit cheaper. But remember, you always run the risk of if he has a good game, he's going to be completely untouchable, and then the following week after Dallas, he plays the Saints on the road, which means Drew Brees is going to be in the dome, he's going to be putting up points, and the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be in a really pass-heavy game script. So even if Jeffery does have a bad game, there's still a chance where people just want to start Alshon Jeffery because he's going to be ranked easily inside the top 10 that week. So me personally, I'm looking to trade for him right away, and no, he's not going to be super cheap, but he's a safe guy, a consistent guy, and an upside guy that your team can rely on throughout the playoffs. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for this week's video. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.